Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Donna Bush, and I want to thank you for joining us today for this important and historic press briefing. We're here to discuss the upcoming national referendum, which has generated a lot of public interest and which I'm sure we're all looking forward to hearing more about during this morning's press briefing. First, I'd like to extend a special welcome to members of the media who've joined us either in studio or via Zoom. Of course, your role in helping us to inform the public is critical, and we appreciate your ongoing commitment to ensuring that accurate and timely information is shared with our community. I would also like to acknowledge and welcome senior civil servants who are here with us in the studio. Without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce the panel today to you. The Honorable Kenneth Bryan, Minister for Tourism and Ports. We also have the Chief Officer for the Ministry of Tourism and Ports, Mr. Stran Bodden. And we have Mr. Ralston Henry. He's the Senior Economist with the Economics and Statistics Office. We'll begin by inviting Minister Bryan to make his remarks.
Thank you, Donna, and ladies and gentlemen, members of the media, those fellow Caymanians who are tuned in, welcome, and a special welcome to those who are tuned in via Radio Cayman. Good morning, and thank you for joining me today as I host this important press conference on behalf of my government and my government colleagues. As the Minister for Tourism and Ports, I'm pleased to have this opportunity to discuss Cabinet's decision to hold a historic referendum to determine three critical issues in our country. Today, my goal is to share information with the public on matters which for a number of years have been subject of significant national interest and public debate. In fact, it is no exaggeration to say that the topics that we will be discussing here today have the potential to shape the future of our beloved Cayman Islands for generations to come. As many of you may be aware, the government recently announced its intention to hold a referendum before the end of the year to allow our people to determine whether the Cayman Islands should develop cruise berthing infrastructure. After careful consideration and further review of the proposed timeline, Cabinet subsequently took the decision last week to hold the referendum concurrently with the general elections in 2025, and to use the opportunity to include two additional questions on the ballot. Before we dive into the specifics of each referendum question, I would like to briefly address the principal reasons why the government decided to hold the referendum alongside the upcoming general elections. The first consideration had to do with the cost and the logistics. Holding the referendum at the same time as the general election significantly reduces the administrative and operational cost and reflects the government's commitment to using the public funds in ways that are fiscally responsible and efficient. Combining these two major events also allows the Elections Office to maximize its resources from a logistical perspective and eliminates the need to shut down our schools and businesses on two separate occasions. Secondly, this combined approach allows for more comprehensive education campaign. The government is committed to ensuring that Caymanians have access to balanced, clear, and factual information that will allow them to make informed decisions when casting their votes. Holding the referendum alongside the elections provides for more time for consultation and debate, ensuring that voters have ample opportunity to fully understand the implications of their votes, whether for or against, on these important national issues. Finally, aligning the referendum with the general elections gives eligible persons who are not yet registered more time to submit their applications to the Elections Office. My colleagues and I are keen to ensure that as many Caymanians as possible have the opportunity to participate in both the referendum and the general elections in order to take part in shaping the future of our beloved country. Caymanians will now have until the 1st of January 2025 to submit their applications to the Elections Office, in order to be included in the register of electors and vote in the upcoming elections and referendum. Turning our attention now to the three questions that will be posed at the referendum. It is fair to say that each of these questions could be defined as a define a different pathway for our nation in the future. Taking each one individually, first question asks is whether the country should develop cruise berthing infrastructure. The government's decision to bring this to a vote is due to the ongoing decline of the cruise tourism industry, which has been particularly noticeable following the COVID pandemic. Over time, it is projected that the continued reduction in cruise calls to Grand Cayman will cause severe negative impacts on jobs for Caymanians who work within the cruise sector, on Caymanian-owned businesses that support the cruise sector, and on the Cayman Islands economy through the loss of millions of dollars in revenue, which the cruise sector contributes on an annual basis. A recent report done by the Economics and Statistics Office, better known as the ESO, outlines the economic significance of the cruise sector to our islands. It highlights that the activities driven by cruise tourism currently supports an estimated 2,587 jobs within the country, representing 5.8% of the total annual employment. The report quantifies that pre-pandemic in 2018, the cruise sector generated a total spending contribution to our economy of $350.1 million in the Cayman Islands economy. That figure has now fallen to $261 million in 2023 and is expected to further decrease to $253.4 million in 2024, indicating that the cruise sector, which has historically been a lifeline for many Caymanian workers and businesses, is showing a pattern of steady decline. The report also forecasts that aside from a temporary rise in cruise calls in 2025, Cayman Islands can expect an annual decline of around 5.2% going forward. Without intervention, this decline is projected to continue until our cruise industry, as we know it, dwindles to nothing. I've asked Mr. Ralston Henry, the senior economist who have been involved in drafting the ESO report, to join us here on the panel today. I'll briefly pause my remarks to invite Mr. Henry to provide a brief synopsis of the report and its key findings. Mr. Henry?
Thank you very much, Minister. Good morning, members of the media, viewers, listeners, and all persons participating today. I first want to thank the Ministry of Tourism for inviting me to share this report, which from our perspective is meant to assist and facilitate national dialogue on cruise tourism. After the decision by the Cabinet to hold a referendum on the direction of cruise tourism, the Ministry of Tourism engaged ESO to discuss the impact of cruise tourism on the islands over recent years. And that request culminated in this report, which the Minister and will be available after this press briefing. At the ESO, we consider it a professional duty to provide accurate statistics and objective economic analysis on matters of economic importance. I'm therefore happy that the Ministry has chosen to add this report as one of hopefully many quantitative decision advices in the ongoing national dialogue. The assessment presents an aggregated estimates premised on a few assumptions which are outlined in the report. It is my hope that the report will assist all stakeholders and members of the public in understanding how cruise contributes to Cayman's economy. Notably, no attempt will be made in this report to evaluate the overall cost or opportunity cost of cruise tourism to the country. And that was my preamble to the report. I promise to be very brief, as the Minister just noted. So the first section of the report highlights an economic overview or socioeconomic dynamics of the Cayman Islands. I won't dwell on that too much. For persons wanting that, ESO website, which is www.eso.ky, provides a wealth of information on the economic dynamics. One important element that came out of that, however, is that Cayman is a small, open, and service-based economy. And because of that, we are particularly vulnerable to shocks in different sectors. Now, economic diversity presents a good buffer or defense against economic shocks in any particular sector. Moody's in their last update noted that for Cayman to get a rating upgrade, this is one of the areas that would add positively to that view. Now, in that context, it is important to highlight that any sustained decline or loss in cruise tourism must be considered in the context of Cayman's already limited economic diversification. Now, quickly looking at tourism arrival numbers, we saw a general increase in tourism numbers for the 7 years preceding the COVID-19 pandemic. And this has, over time, so over the last 7 years, we saw a general increase with an average increase of 3.2% per year up to 2019. Between 2020 and 2021, that's explainable in terms of the shutdown measures and the closures of the borders. What we didn't see, however, as the minister alluded to early in his presentation, is any recovery significant enough to match the pre-pandemic era. And so we saw a stagnated arrivals in 2023-2024 period. Naturally, this sparked some interest, and we wanted to understand what was driving this. And so we sought to, in the report, look at two comparisons between the 2 years immediately preceding the pandemic, the 2 years after the pandemic. And what we found in that were a number of patterns which we found interesting. Firstly, when we look at the major cruise lines contributing to Cayman arrivals, namely Carnival Cruise Line and Royal Caribbean Cruises, their contribution to arrivals fell from 40% in the 2 years pre-pandemic, fell to 40%, in the 2 years after the pandemic, from 54% in the 2 years prior to the pandemic. And that would have contributed largely to an overall decline of 33.9% in the two comparative periods. Now, naturally, we wanted to delve a little bit more into that. And what we saw was that certainly for these cruise lines, for Royal Caribbean, of the last 12 new vessels that that cruise line introduced, only 2 have visited the Cayman Islands. And those are the 2 smaller of the 12. More specifically, none of Royal Caribbean's newer ships, which are the largest class of vessels, are visiting Cayman shores. For Carnival Cruise Line, of the 12 newest vessels in its fleet, 5 visit the Cayman Islands. 2 of the 5 have not returned since the pandemic, and the 3rd have not visited in 2024. So only 2 of the 12 have consistently visited our shores. For MSC Cruises, only 1 of its newest 6 vessels visit Cayman shores, and these are the 3 largest contributors to our cruise arrival. From our standpoint, this adds to the point that larger vessels or the major cruise lines are shifting to larger vessels, and those vessels are largely bypassing Cayman. I know the minister will say, well, he knows this already, but it's good to see this coming out of the data, and it's something that we observe. The data also shows that, notwithstanding that, there are 2 cruise lines that showed significant increases in the post-pandemic era, namely Disney Cruise Line and Celebrity Cruise Line. Notably, however, these cruise lines have a smaller capacity in terms of the capacity of their ships within the fleet relative to the other 3, which was mentioned earlier. Turning to expenditure, To compile expenditure, we incorporated spending from cruise passengers, crew members that disembarked, fees paid directly to the port authority, and tendering fees for bringing passengers ashore. Estimated expenditure from cruise arrivals peaked at 178.1 million in 2018, before falling to 166.8 million in 2019, and the total expenditure in 2023 was estimated at 132.8 million and is expected to be 128.9 million in 2024. Our assessment suggests shipping and excursion account for more than 86% of passenger spending, followed by food and beverage and other recreation. More specifically, shopping accounts for roughly 47.5% of expenses, and excursion account for roughly 39%. Naturally, so from there, we allocated these expenditures to the industrial sectors which comply with our SNA or GDP estimates. And we found that wholesale and retail accounts for or gets the bulk of spending from passengers, followed by other services, which includes recreation, excursions, etc. Applying sectoral multipliers to these expenditures, we found that cruise expenditure in each year was estimated for 2018 using those multipliers, and cruise spending generated an estimated value added of 191 million, or 4.4% of nominal GDP at basic prices in 2018. Activities induced by cruise spending in 2018 supported an estimated 2,587 jobs, or 5.8% of total employment for the year. For 2023, gross value added was estimated at 142 million, or 2.5% of total GDP. While in 2024, gross value added is expected at 138.3 million, or 2.4% of GDP. In 2023, 1,622 jobs were supported, or 2.8% of total employment, while 1,537 jobs were supported in 2024, or 2.6% of employment. The report estimates that the cruise industry contributed roughly 30.5 million to government revenue in 2018, representing 3.9% of total tax revenue for the year. For 2023, revenue from cruises is estimated at 22.1 million, or 2.3% of tax revenue for that year. Based on the current cruise schedule and the trend of newer ships not calling in Cayman's port and projections for the cruise industry, it is estimated that cruise arrivals will fall by 4.8% in 2024, before increasing to 5.2% in 2025. Without additional actions, projections for arrivals to decline by an average of 5.2% annually in the ensuing years after 2025. Gross value added is projected to fall to 128.9 million, or 1.8% of GDP by 2029. Total supported jobs are projected to decline by an aggregated 19.3% by 2029 to 1,169. Government revenue from cruises is projected to fall by an average of 4.3% annually after 2025. We sought to do in the final stage of the report, a scenario analysis that essentially looked at what would happen if Cayman was able to attract larger vessels from the major cruise lines that we mentioned that actually visit our shores. It is estimated that with a larger port, if we were able to attract these larger vessels, Cayman could receive between 17,621 to 419,000, could have received between 17,621 to 419,000 visitors in 2024. So had we had a port and were able to attract these larger vessels, we could have between 17,000 and 419,000 additional. The potential visitors foregone is expected to rise as the cruise lines move to larger vessels within their fleet. That is a broad summary of the report, as this will be available after the current proceedings. And again, thank you, Minister, for having me.
Thank you, Mr. Henry, for that comprehensive overview, and we will definitely make it available not only to the press, but to the public as well. I should also know that the report will be released, though, following this press conference and available to everyone on our website at www.gov.ky/tourism-ports. My friends, all of the data available to us thus far, including feedback from the cruise line, suggests that without a cruise pair, the Cayman Islands is essentially deciding to step away from the cruise tourism industry. Consequently, as a government, we believe that building a pier would be in the long-term best interest of the Cayman Islands, as it would sustain our cruise tourism industry for years to come. However, this is not a decision that the government intends to make alone. We want to hear from the people what their perspective is, and that is why we're having a referendum on this issue as soon as possible and why it's so vitally important. While on the subject of cruise, I would like to take this opportunity to advise the public that in my capacity as the Minister for Tourism, I intend to travel to St. Martin later this month to attend the Florida Caribbean Cruise Association Conference. This will be the last opportunity for me as Minister to meet one more time with the cruise line heads before the referendum. During my discussions with the cruise executives, I expect to receive updated information from each of the cruise lines regarding their projections of cruise calls for 2025 and beyond. These meetings ensure that all parties are on the same page and that expectations, impediments, and successes are openly discussed. These discussions with the cruise lines will avail vital details that will allow the Cayman Islands to better understand the true picture of the cruise call numbers for the Cayman Islands' future. The details of these meetings are important for everyone in the Cayman Islands to hear and know in order to make an informed decision on referendum day. Whether you are for, against, or undecided. And as such, I have invited a representative, and as such, my apologies, I've invited a representative from either side of the spectrum of the cruise pair issue to accompany me and my ministry team to be a part of these discussions. The Cruise Pair Referendum Group, known better as CPR, known for its stance against the building of a pier, and the Association for Advancement of Cruise Tourism, better known as ACT, is the group that is supportive of building the pier. Both groups have been invited to come along, and as of press time, I've not yet received confirmation from the CPR group of accepting the invitation, but I'm hoping that they will. The ACT group has confirmed that they are willing to join us on this very important trip. By joining us for these meetings with the FCCA, both sides will have the opportunity to hear our conversations with the cruise line executives firsthand and engage with them directly. It is important that both groups have the opportunity to fully understand what the future of cruise tourism in the Cayman Islands is looking like, particularly over the next 10 years. Turning now to the second and third questions that will be included on the referendum day, namely, whether the Cayman Islands should introduce a national lottery and whether the possession of small amounts of marijuana should be decriminalized. It should be noted that both of these topics have been the subjects of considerable debate for some time. The public may recall that in December of 2022, a motion entitled Referendum on National Lottery and Decriminalization of Small Quantities of Cannabis was brought before Parliament by the former Premier, the Honorable Wayne Panton. At that time, the motion was strongly debated and was virtually unanimously approved in Parliament, but to date, it has not been acted upon. Today, I'm proud to say that the government is keeping its word and delivering on the resolution that was duly passed on the 7th of December, 2022. We affirm our commitment to allow the people to have their say on matters which, at that time, were described as the matters of national importance. Speaking first on the question of a national lottery, one of the most compelling arguments for establishing a national lottery is the potential for increased revenue. Lotteries are a popular means for raising funds for various causes without imposing taxes or fees on our people. In many countries, national lotteries are used to fund programs within education, sports, as well as infrastructure and community development. Those in favor may argue that the introduction of a well-regulated national lottery would curb the illegal gambling operations that operate in the black market environment here in Cayman. Those against may point to some of the risks and drawbacks, such as potential increase in gambling addictions or religious objections, which are all points which merit careful consideration and discussion. But to be clear, in this regard, a yes vote for a national lottery does not mean that the Cayman Islands version of a Florida Powerball will spring up overnight. Rather, a yes vote would mean that the next government, whomever the people decide, will begin the process of consulting with experts to create a national lottery system that works best for our islands. Establishing a lottery is a complex undertaking, and any government would want to ensure that the framework is robust and is implemented in a way that is both responsible and beneficial to the Caymanian people. The government, when in the same sitting of approving those referendum questions, had before them the consideration of a gambling bill to increase the penalties. The government took the decision to ask for a referendum before increasing any penalties in the gambling law, due to the accepted view that the numbers were almost a commonplace in Cayman society, and it would be best to have a referendum before having any changes to the gambling bills and its penalties and fees. As such, I believe if there is a no vote in respect to a national lottery, there will no longer be any justification not to support increasing the penalties in the previous proposed illegal gambling bill. Finally, on the question of the decriminalization of cannabis, or marijuana as it's commonly known, or some people call it ganja. This is an issue that was brought before Parliament and received widespread support to proceed to a referendum. But again, no further action was taken. Recognizing that this is a sensitive issue that has the potential to impact many areas of our society, this government is committed to hearing the will of the people for this, because this subject, my apologies, let me start over. Recognizing that this is a sensitive issue that has the potential to impact many areas of our society, this government is committed to hearing the will of the people, because it's subject to more than just changing lives and changing laws. Those in favor may say that it's about giving people, particularly young people, the chance to thrive and succeed without carrying the weight of a criminal record, for what can be described as a relatively minor infraction, while those against may regard decriminalization as sending a message that drug use is condoned and encouraged. As we consider decriminalization here in the Cayman Islands, it may be worth noting that we are not alone in this discussion. Several other Caribbean neighbors have already pondered this question, and some have even moved forward with decriminalizing the possession of small amounts, and some have even legalized marijuana for personal use. It is important that I highlight the difference between legalization and decriminalization, though. In simple terms, legalization means that marijuana use will be fully legal under the law, and you would be able to buy it legally from licensed shops. This is not what the government is intending or suggesting in this referendum. It's important that I make that clear. Decriminalization means that marijuana would still be illegal, but a person caught with small amounts would not face serious criminal charges or jail time. Instead, it would be treated as a minor offense, similar to getting a traffic ticket, and they would not get a criminal record as a result. If people vote yes to decriminalization, the definition of small amounts would be enshrined in law so that there would be no uncertainty as to what the amount is. That will be defined if, in fact, a law is done in debate in Parliament. I would like to make it clear once more that the government's goal is not to persuade voters either way, but rather to ensure that when our people go to the polls, they're fully informed and feel confident in making their decision. If the people's will to move forward with decriminalization and they return a yes vote, the government will be expected to respect that decision and bring forward the necessary legislation to support that outcome. If the people vote no, then the current status quo remains. While on the subject of voting, I think it may be useful for me to clarify that the results of the outcome of the referendum will be decided on a simple majority. This means that for each of the questions and their answers, whether yes or no, that receives more than 50% of the votes cast wins. To be clear, this is based on the number of persons who actually vote in the referendum and not on the total number of registered voters. For example, if 10,000 people vote on a particular question and 5,001 vote yes, then the yes opinion wins, even if it's just by a small margin. This method ensures a straightforward process where the public's preference is directly reflected in its results. And while I'm on that point of process, I'm going to ask my chief officer to outline what are the next steps from a parliamentary process in respect to approving the, the referendum bill. Yo?
Thank you, Minister. Good morning to all. I would like to briefly explain the process, as Minister said, with respect to the referendum, the development of the referendum law. Break it down into stages covering the resolution, motion, bill, and finally the enactment of the legislation. Section 69 of the Cayman Islands Constitution provides in part that a resolution is required for the making of a law to provide for the holding of a referendum under that section. To facilitate that requirement, a motion must first be prepared by the relevant ministry. A motion is essentially a formal proposal put forward by a member of parliament for discussion or debate in parliament. In this instance, the motion for the cruise berthing referendum was prepared by the Ministry of Tourism and Ports, and it will be debated in parliament during the next sitting of parliament commencing on the 7th of October 2024. When a motion has been debated by members of parliament, it is put to a vote, which if passed is commonly referred to as a resolution. Think of the motion as being akin to a proposal and the resolution as being the decision or outcome that has been accepted via majority vote. Once Parliament has passed the resolution, the next stage is for a bill to be developed. A bill is essentially a draft law or proposed law. The bill is required to pave the way for a referendum law to be established. Bills are also debated in Parliament and, if approved, are then passed to Her Excellency the Governor for assent. The referendum bill is expected to be debated in Parliament in December 2024. Thank you, Minister, for that.
Thank you, CEO. As I mentioned at the beginning of my remarks, this referendum is likely to bring changes that will have lasting impacts on our islands. Consequently, this government stands committed to rolling out a comprehensive public education campaign. The Department of Communications have developed a draft communication plan that will now be expanded to cover all 3 subject areas in the referendum. The campaign will provide balanced information on the pros and cons of each issue so the public can make informed decisions. I will leave it up to the communications experts to determine how the information will be disseminated, but I can confirm that some of the key components will include a televised national debate between individuals standing for or against the cruise pair, allowing both sides to articulate their respective positions and the public to listen in. Secondly, a detailed video highlighting the pros and cons of all 3 referendum questions that will be made available online so that the public can view it at their convenience. Thirdly, a dedicated website is also being developed to serve as a central hub for all referendum-related information. Fourthly, social media channels will also be widely used to ensure that we effectively reach the widest audiences as possible. It is vital that every Caymanian, regardless of how they choose to access this information, can find the answers that they need. I cannot stress enough how important it is for everyone to be fully informed before heading to the polls. I'm also aware that the public has lots of questions, such as questions about the economic impact on the cruise industry, and about Caymanian employment in the sector, as well as the environment. And I hope that we were able to answer some of those questions here today, and those that remain will be addressed as a part of the education campaign over the coming months. Rest assured that we will continue to engage with the public, answering your questions and ensuring that you are fully equipped to make informed choices. In closing, I would like to emphasize to all Caymanians that this referendum is not just a vote on 3 issues. It is a vote on the future of the Cayman Islands with respect to our economy, our culture, and our way of life. This is a historic moment, and it is your voice and your vote that will shape its outcome. I give the assurance that this government is committed to providing you with all the information that you will need to make the best decisions for yourself, your families, your business, and our country. And while it is true that we do not know the outcome of the general election, the members of this government, should we be returned by the grace of God, we will respect the will of the people that we serve and give our commitment that we will stand by the choices that the people have decided in the votes of the referendum, whatever it may be. My friends, I have every confidence that together we will decide the best path forward for these beloved Cayman Islands that we call home. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister Bryan, for that update. We're now going to turn to the members of the media, starting with Ms. Wendy Ledger from Cayman News Service, who will ask questions of the panelists.
Hello, everyone. I know you're excited to see me. Um, first of all, can I ask some questions about the issues of the referendum? We don't have a referendum law, so you're going to have to put all of the stuff into the legislation, and I'm assuming it's going to be one bill for all three questions. So are you going to redo the motion that exists, or are you going to have three separate motions?
No, we have been advised that we don't have to do over the previous motion, as it's not the end of an administration. The law does not specify that you would have to do it with a certain time period, but we're going to assume, with the absence of direction of timing, that it would be acceptable that the resolution done within this administration will be accepted to meet the
No,
requirements.
you're misunderstanding me.
Sorry.
The motion is only about cruise. Are you gonna rewrite it and add ganja and gambling?
No. So let me try to clarify. We believe that the previous resolution motion that was accepted
With you?
and yes, you understand now?
Okay.
In 2022
Yeah,
has
with you.
met the requirements for an approval for questions to go on a referendum. This next motion that will be debated at the next sitting of the House will meet the requirements for that question. So all three questions will met the requirement
And
and we
merge
add
into
them
one bill.
all into one bill, correct?
Okay, now in the bill, how are you going to address campaign financing for all of these questions in regards to the types of groups that may emerge on one side or the other of these debates? So how is campaign financing going to be governed?
I haven't been advised from legal in respect to in the bill. The bill is in its draft form right now. After the motion has been dealt with in Parliament, then I'll have the final draft, and I'll be happy to
You
explain
will
at
deal
that
with it.
point.
Campaign financing will be.
I am not aware if campaign finance has to be addressed within the bill. So I don't want to speak to it. I'll be happy to get back to you on that at another time.
Okay. Obviously, it's a big issue because you've just said that you've got the whole of the Department of Communications that's going to be giving information out with regards to these referendums. And although government doesn't appear to be taking a position on the lottery or ganja, it's certainly taken a position on the port. You just said it yourself. So you're obviously already, and the figures, we all know stats are not neutral, right? They can be twisted and used in any way you want, as they have been already. So do you understand that people are going to be concerned about campaign financing, given the power of the state versus CPR, for example, as the obvious opposition side?
Thank you for the question. I'm well aware of persons' perception that the government could be using the public's purse to persuade persons to vote for. I think the government has been very diligent in trying to ensure that we're approaching this in a balanced way, promoting pros and cons, and respecting the people's will. The government is of the view that we should build a pier for the sustainability of the cruise industry, but if the people choose not to, we will not move forward. The government has not said that it will not present the negatives of building a pier. It's presenting both sides. So I don't think it would be that it's being perceived as to be unfair in respect to the promotions to our comms, because we're presenting both sides. The other factor that I think is important to consider is that there's a difference between a government-initiated referendum and a people's-initiated referendum, and the government should have its right to promote a government-initiated referendum. I think the argument could be stronger if it was a people's-initiated referendum, but at the risk of going outside of my legal learnings, I'll stop there and I'll let the legal team advise myself as minister and my team as to the subject area of campaign finance.
Okay, I'm going to leave that one alone because obviously that's going to come up now for the next few months, so there'll be plenty more opportunity. I'd like to ask some very specific questions about the stats that you just gave from Mr. Henry from the ESO. Can you tell us exactly how many of those 2,887 jobs are solely dependent on cruise, i.e., so take out the guys that drive the tenders, because that would be a solely dependent on cruise job, and perhaps the security at the port. But out of the remaining 2,887 jobs, how many those workers are purely dependent on crews. So in other words, they don't work in shops, they don't work in restaurants, they don't drive taxis, they don't drive buses, they do some other job that is purely dependent on crews.
The honest answer is, Wendy, no, I don't have that response for you. You've highlighted tender, which I think is probably one of the very, very few that is solely dependent. I mean, whatever other service you choose, there's going to be a component because it's a service being offered to the public. It's just that cruise visitors are the ones that take advantage of it the most. But whatever other service you choose, there's going to be some local component, some other tourist component from stay-over tourism, for example, that access that service. So what the number speaks to is really on aggregate, how much is being spent on that sector, and then from the spending, how much employees are responsible to deliver that output. And so that's what it speaks to. But we can't really pull out from a shop, for example, that store clerk that is standing at the counter, whether he's associated with a cruise passenger versus a local passenger.
Okay, so
What I can tell you
we don't have
is
any
that the
answer to that.
spending to that, how much actually goes to.
can you tell us how many of them are Caymanian?
So we did, the report does have the breakout for that within, sorry, just give me 1 second here. So within, in terms of employment within wholesale and retail, 46% are Caymanians, and within the other services, which is your excursions, etc., 43% are Caymanians.
Explain that difference again. Sorry, I didn't quite catch. 46 in one and 43 in the
So within retail, and so we highlighted two sectors as being key.
so it's 46%
recipients.
of retailers that are Caymanian.
Yes.
Not 46% of the 2,887.
No.
46, just the retail, and then 43% of the trips.
Yeah.
Okay.
And just circling back to your question, I just want to highlight that when we speak about the jobs being supported by cruise spending, we're talking about the output generated from spending and the jobs required to meet that output. So those jobs are not for the entire business. It's just based on the output that is generated from the cruise spending, the jobs that meet that. So de facto, you could have 6 persons in a company. Half of the output is generated for locals, half is generated for crews. We're just pulling the half that comes from.
Right, okay. Yeah.
And if you could wrap up our questions.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
ultimately, if I-
the other
Sorry, Wendy,
question really was about the numbers. So what you were
one
talking.
second, Wendy, I think I would like to opine on that. So is it possible to assume that those numbers in stayover also have a duplicator or assistance from crews in some capacity as well?
I don't want to say it's a duplicate because what, and the issue here, Minister, and just I'll take 1 minute to just kind of spell it out. When you speak about a business, you could have 2 persons in that business. Like I say, it's allocating 50% output to locals, 50% to tourism. However, if the 50% for tourism falls out, there's no explicit case that the business will dismiss one of the workers because it could be for whatever micro reason they keep open. So it's hard to say,
Yeah.
is what I'm getting to,
Yeah.
that it's explicitly, but just based on the output that the business is generating, if you were to split it, they're paying half for this and half.
A natural assumption to make.
Yeah.
All right. Ms. Wendy?
And the final question I have, no, because I'm being told I have the final question. But the figures that you're talking about, if we build the pier, we don't even know what pier, where this pier will be, how big it will be, how many ships it will have. But you're talking about up to as many as another 400,000 that we're missing out on. Is that what you're saying? And that's what we'll get if we get the piers. Because I think there is, even amongst those who may say that they want to retain crews, they don't want the kind of numbers that
Previously had.
those huge, because the problem is now that if we build the piers and we bring these huge ships, then there are gazillions of people, and that's what people don't want. I mean, so therein lies the problem. How are we if the people say yes, we build a pier, where are the guarantees that we're not going to have this problem again of quantity over quality? How do we deal with that?
Thank you for the question, Wendy. I always appreciate your very investigative questions. Remind me of my time in the journalist. I think the answer is pretty simple. It's better to have the opportunity to limit than not have the opportunity to have any at all. The volume, or what people would say the carrying capacity of the country, is determined on us, the people, through their representatives. So to use your example, I agree there's many people who don't want to see the overloading of our natural environment, our Stingray City, our beaches, and so forth. So whatever that figure may be, when we decide it, we can limit it. Just because we build a pier don't mean that we have to have all ships coming. What building a pier does, in my mind, is allow us to have the ability for whatever number we want, but not having one doesn't allow us to control whether we're going to have the numbers at all. That's the important difference. So if, say, for example, today, if the public said, you know what, Minister, we're happy at exactly 1.2, which is what was the last year's numbers, and we don't want to go any further than that, pier allows us to secure that. Without a pier, what our numbers is telling us is that a 5.2 decline continuously year by year, and that number will no longer be 1.2. It may end up being 500,000 or potentially 200,000, where the economy cannot sustain. So I agree with you. I don't think that the public wants mass tourism, but a pier allows you to control it. Better to be in the position to control it than not. But thank you so much, Wendy, for your questions.
Very, very quickly, I know, but very quickly, you said it's not, obviously this is non-binding. So at the end of the day, you're saying that every member of UPM at the moment supports the idea of whatever the outcome is, if they get, because remember, you're individuals, you're not running
correct.
together, you're not even campaigning as a government together, I don't expect. So you're going to have a situation where 10 of you might say that, but behind closed doors, you know, one of you might not. So how do we, as the people, as the voters, know that you all, because you've changed your minds a lot about what you do and whether you like each other or you don't like each other and who should be in and who shouldn't. So how do we know? We know, say, for example, if it's a no, we don't want peers. McKeever's not supporting that because he supports peers full on, right, 100%. So how do we know that the result is going to be respected by the group that calls itself UPM, because we don't know that because you're not collective, you're not like an agreed body.
Thank you, Wendy, for your question. I guess it's a matter of trust and faith. I can only say to you that every elected member of the current administration has given their commitment to respect the people's will on the outcome of the referendum. But the concern that you're highlighting could be said for anybody who says they want to put themselves forward to represent the people, because it's non-binding, as well as persons who are putting themselves up for office. Somebody may come and say, I want to run in Georgetown Central right now, and say, what is your position? And positions can change. I can only say that my commitment with the people that I represent is the people must have their say, and their say must be respected. And that's what I'm delivering on behalf of my elected members of our government.
Thank you very much.
Media with his questions. Okay, he has no questions. So let's move on to Jerry E. Banks from Radio Cayman.
Good morning to the panel. My first question, how much is it going to cost, the referendum?
As per our last estimates, it was 1.2. That was it being independent of the general elections. So obviously that changed.
Separate from the elections.
That was when the proposed referendum would have been separate from the general elections. Now, as a result of this change, it allows us to duplicate resources. So to say specifically what the amount would be extra than a general election, I can't answer that today, but I know that it is going to be tremendously less. I think some figures that was thrown out, like an extra 200,000 than what you would normally have for a referendum, for an election anyway. So if you were to specify from an accounting principle, what is the exact cost extra for a referendum than a general election, I would probably put it in the ballpark of $100,000 to $200,000 more. I don't want to be held to that figure. I'm happy to, or you can reach out to the elections office, and I'm quite sure they'll be happy to give you a quote, and I'll make sure I have that information available to me in the future in the event the question comes up again.
The additional questions that you announced will be included in the referendum, some of these things are not your ministerial responsibilities. For example, Cruz is, you're the Minister of Tourism and Ports. What about the other topics that are going to be in it? Are we going to see more involvement from those directed ministers? Who are those ministers and what would their involvement look like?
Well, interestingly enough, we examined that question, whether I'm supposed to be the minister delivering on the other topics. But if you examine further into the two topics, they actually fall under the police arm, the governor, under the constitution, because they have to do with the penal code. And marijuana itself is not specified for anybody. So in my duty to represent all Caymanians in all topics, the communication plan will be delivered on behalf of the whole government, not just behalf of me as minister. I'm assisting in the respect of having the closest information and details and specialities and experts close to the cruise component. But the other two topics are general in a larger term, and hence the reason it was natural for me to take the charge on it.
Now, my next question really relates to the different topics. So let's start with cruise.
Now,
You said earlier in your speech that it is not the government's intentions to proceed to convince anyone one way or the other. I don't know how that adds up. You have just also said that it is the government's position that the cruise port should be built. That is the clear position of the government. What is the position of the government on the other two questions that are going to be on the referendum? What is your understanding of your cabinet colleagues? And two, what do you understand your support is from the opposition as it relates to these topics?
thank you, Mr. Jebby. Your latter question first. I can't speak to what the opposition's position is, particularly with the upcoming question about cruise piers. I can make some assumptions, and I'll do that. I'll entertain that. One is that they brought, previously in the last administration, most of those who were in opposition, outside of the Honorable Wayne Panton, former Premier, and the Honorable Christopher Saunders, who's now in opposition. Excluding those two, I would assume that the rest of the opposition would be in support of this. But they have, you have the ability to reach out to them on that. And
The reason I ask, sorry to cut you off, is I just want to know what level of cooperation the government is having with the opposition. This is going to be a national referendum. A lot of these topics that we have heard from the previous administration on as well, and we have seen instances where the government and the opposition take a unified approach. So I was wondering if we would be seeing something similar in that regard for this.
I would welcome it. I think that some issues should never have a political spin to it, and I welcome any unified approach on these issues. I can't answer that because we haven't had that conversation, but I'm certain that there'll be more conversations when we meet in Parliament on the 7th of October. So in respect to the referendum on cruise berthing, I want to now move to the other two topics, which I think the evidence of the resolution in Parliament has given evidence for you to determine what their position is, because they all voted for it. Every member except the Sir Alan McLaughlin, who decided to abstain due to, in the records, the Hansards will say that the reason behind it was the resolution within the motion itself. The wording wasn't comfortable, and these are comments by himself. But now it's irrelevant because he's now the speaker and would not have a vote on this matter. So the only other person who was not present would have been the then speaker, the Honorable Minister of Sustainability, the Honorable Kathy Wilkes-Ebanks. Hope I didn't mess it up. Sorry, Minister. And she would have been the speaker at the time, but she's given her commitment, and I'm speaking on behalf of all my colleagues in government today. So the position is clear. We support the building of a pier, but we'll respect the people's will if they choose not to. The other ones, we think that we'll provide the information and take the guidance from them either way they go.
I must ask, because you did mention that this is something that has been previously voted on in Parliament.
Yes.
If you have already voted on it in Parliament, and you, as well as the other 18 members of Parliament, are representatives of the people, do you guys not have the authority now to proceed on the vote that you've already done? Why are you doing the referendum again? If you guys have kind of already had a position and you've already voted on it, why not just go ahead, the government will have its way and the opposition its say. So if you've already voted on it, can you explain the decision behind having the referendum still?
Yes, I can. The support was to have a referendum. There was not a bill or a motion to say implement by law X, Y, and Z. So the support, you can clearly come to the conclusion that everybody's in support of asking the people what their choice is.
Okay.
So I can't say to you that everybody would approve a bill, which would be an actual law, to say decriminalize marijuana. I think we're at a stage in our history where public participation in serious decisions are coming to the forefront, and I'm rather proud about that. We should never be afraid to get our people involved in serious decisions, and I think this is why this is going to be a historical one. I think it will change the narrative of how we approach decisions in this country and not be afraid to ask our people what we should do about sensitive matters. Simple.
Can you share a little bit about what your understanding from your government colleagues are as it relates to the gambling, the amendments, or the referendum question related to gambling? What is it that your government colleagues feel about the situation, and yourself as well as the topic of the decriminalization of marijuana? What do you mean when you say a small quantity? Have you guys had these discussions yet? Have you had input from the police service?
Yes, we have, and I'm not going to go too far into what my colleagues' position is. I think that if you go to the Hansards of Parliament on the 7th of, let me just confirm the date, on the 7th of December, I think the date was 7th of December 2022, you will find the whole debate there where every member, I think, gave contributions to the debate. So they would have expressed their thoughts. And the public can go back to the parliament, which is on YouTube. So I encourage persons, if you want to know how members at that time felt, online at the Kimlan's House of Parliament YouTube website, the debates are there. So I don't think I have to opine on that point. What was the other part of your question?
I was asking about your understanding of your government colleagues on the position of the gambling as well as the decriminalization, and then
that's what I'm
if
saying.
you had input from the police. That was a question.
Yes. So hopefully I was clear in my remarks that at the time we decided not to move forward with the gambling bill, which had amendments to increase the penalties on persons caught in activities of illegal gambling. We at that time decided not to move forward with that bill because we wanted to hear what the people's thoughts were, because it is perceived as commonplace that many people buy local numbers. And we may be increasing the penalties when in fact, maybe the majority of people don't think it should be illegal anymore. So with that in mind, I think that all elected members, except the ones I said to you before was excluded by extension, abstaining or being in the chair as speaker, have all supported that principle of asking the people. And they would have had in their debates their reasoning behind it. And some may have even said, yes, they would do it or not. But I think the more important thing that we should be focusing on is that the people will have their say, and all the elected members of the 19 members of parliament today support that position on these three topics.
Final question:
Gentlemen,
how
that's it.
soon
Yeah.
can the campaign? Can the public expect to see the campaign start from both sides as it relates to these matters?
On both sides, when you say both sides, what do you mean?
For the referendum questions, whether it's the cruise berthing facility or gambling or weed, how soon can the public expect to see the public campaign for the knowledge that you said people get their inputs from the government will expect to get input from the public as well as public campaigning? How soon will that public campaigning start?
Well, I hope to have a national debate sometime in November if I can get it done quick enough and get all sides prepared. But then one thing I do know is that you're not going to start getting that information until we've actually passed a motion in the next sitting of the House. So sometime right after that, you'll be seeing it, and you'll be hearing more press releases from my ministry and potentially the Honorable Premier's office on other updates. So
Thank you so much.
you're
Thank
welcome.
you very much, Jerry. We're now going to go to Zoom, where Mr. Alric Lindsay is standing by. He's from Black Box Insights and News.
Good afternoon, Donna. I just wanted to clarify one item with Minister Bryan. He mentioned earlier that he did not hear from the CPR group regarding their attendance at the FCCA.
Correct.
And I actually got a copy of the message that was presumably sent to you by text last night, explaining that they could not attend and given the reasons why due to short notice. By any chance, did you receive that message?
I have not received that message. I do apologize to the group if they did send. I'm assuming I'll take your word for that. I do apologize. That saddens me. I really wish they could come or send another representative to come to the conference because of the information. But no, it wasn't intended to not give factual information. I just didn't want to say that they weren't coming if I weren't informed. So I apologize. I didn't see the text. I hate to find out like this on national TV, but well, I guess we now know that the CPR group will not be attending. But thank you
So
for
not to dwell on it. It says, dear minister, unfortunately, due to insufficient notice and our inability for any of us to make adjustments to our schedules to be able to attend the FCCA meeting later this month, we extend our regrets that we will not have a representative. Thank you for extending this invitation to us. And that was sent by Ms. Shirley Ralston. Like I said, I'm not going to dwell on the issue. I'll just move straight to the questions.
thank you for letting me know what the text message said.
So straight to the questions then. I understand that Cabinet approved the 1.2 million allocation for the previously proposed referendum. What will you now do with that 1.2 million? Obviously, for example, we have a lot of struggling seniors. We have other issues in the community. Since the 1.2 was approved, what do you now propose to do with it?
That wouldn't be my place to decide. That would be for the Honorable Premier and collectively the government, but I can give you some indications without confirmation. Firstly, though it was approved by Cabinet, it's been approved by Cabinet for us to get a resolve in Parliament, resolution in Parliament to that. So it's a Section 12 resolution, and as a result, we would have to go to Parliament and seek Parliament's permission. Let me double check. It was a Section 12, right? Not a Section 11.5. 11.5? Okay. It may have been a Section 11.5, but ultimately all the same, that would have to be new monies that we would find that wasn't budgeted for, obviously. And the natural thing is to not use the money again because you're going further than what you've budgeted in your annual budget. So it'd be new monies. So the one assumption I'm going to make here is that we would only ask, therefore, by a Section 11.5 or 12, either one, that we'd only use what we need. Just because it was approved doesn't mean that you have to spend it. So there's loads of things that we need to do in this country, and collectively as a government, it could go to schools, it can go to roads, it can go to seniors, it can go to a lot of different things. But I'm quite sure as a group and a government and my leader, the Premier, can help us make that decision on whether we're going to intend to use an extra money that was approved above our budget, or whether or not we just decide not to do that and allow the budget to maintain as it was.
I know that you like to have voters engaged. So one of the questions I have is, given the way that the current registration for voters works, every quarter is a deadline for applications. Would there be an appetite in your government to change the Elections Act so that voter registrations can be done monthly rather than having this quarterly updates to registers?
I don't think I can answer on behalf of the government. I'm not the leader. I can tell you my personal opinion would definitely support that. I think we need to modernize the registration process. But I think it's that question would probably be best suited for the Premier to speak on behalf of everybody, because we haven't spoken about it, and I would speak out of turn if I say anything on behalf of everybody else. But I would definitely endorse that. I think with technology and the way it is today, that we got to be able to verify these processes a lot quicker. But I understand the robust process that they do now, because the worst thing you would want for expediency purposes, you find out somebody's on the elections list that is not qualified to be on it, and that can challenge the whole election all over. So I see the necessity for the robustness, but I do think it's time for a review for us to shorten the period of time, which allows as many people in our community that is qualified to vote a chance to vote. We should never disenfranchise anybody from the opportunity to vote if they want to.
Thank you. I'm not going to take up much more of your time. I just wanted to direct a question to the economist from ESO. And that question is, based on your detailed research, what is the total revenue earned by cruise ships on local tours versus what is earned by local providers on the ground?
I don't want to speak for him, but I'm not. You go ahead and answer first. I'll answer
No,
afterwards.
I'm not sure. I just asked you to repeat the question. I'm not sure I fully understand it.
So I spoke to a Caribbean economist a few weeks ago, and one of the things that she pointed out to me is that it's not just the total number that you tend to look at in any industry. You also have to look at breakdowns of how many Caymanians hold senior posts in the tourism industry, because we always talk about a trickle-down effect. But as you know, it's less than trickles that Caymanians are getting at the end of the day. So the question I'm asking you is, obviously you've done a lot of research. So based on your research, what do your numbers say about the total revenue earned by cruise ships who do local tour bookings on the ship versus the total revenue that the local providers actually receive?
If I may, I see your question, and I'm not trying to answer for him, but based on the report and what I see there, I don't think we have the information within the ESO or our ministry to give the answer to that, because what you're talking about is the share of profits between the two parties, and they wouldn't give us that information. Now, you may get the information to say this tour costs X amount. Say, for instance, $60. How much of that went to the actual tour operators who do the delivery of the service, and how much of it went to the cruise lines because they had it online selling it for you? That data we don't get. So I wouldn't be able, I don't think I can. Do you have that information?
No.
I didn't think so. We need that kind of stuff, but that is getting into personal business operations, and we can't mandate that they tell us that. Even though it would be good information to have, I agree with you, because you can tell what the true value of cruise is to the Cayman Islands. It's like the hotels. The hotels make millions of dollars for the Cayman Islands, but how much of that millions of dollars actually go right back out of the Cayman Islands? So let me not open up another can of worms, but I see your question, but I don't think we can answer it, sir.
So I understand that you can't answer, and I understand that you may go and look for the data, but this is critical economic information, because one cannot make a global statement that cruise ships benefit the Cayman Islands in a particular way without giving the breakdown of the data. And I'll give you an illustration of what I mean. When we talk about gross domestic product and GDP per capita, and people from the outside of the Cayman Islands look at those numbers, they think that everyone in Cayman is making $70,000 per year. But the truth is, when you look at it from an economics perspective, you have to look at how that money is distributed.
Agreed.
So that's the question. That's the reason that I'm asking the question, is to understand the real economics, because we can talk in sound bites, and then we can talk about data and what the economic impacts are. So that's why I directed the question to your economists, just to explain.
Thank you. And just to wrap up, I think it's only fair that I say that analysis is one that is true. Depends on how you look at it, what data you have. But The same can be said for financial services. The same can be said for stayover crews or for any other industry, because we do have a lot of outside investment and some of that money doesn't stay here. Again, I agree with you. I wish I had the information. It will help us with better analysis. But um, unless you're, I get your point, but it's not always perfect in respect to this analysis. But what we do know that the money circulates in the economy, and though we may not always agree with the trickle down effect, and it's better to give Caymanians more share of the pie. This is the economy that we do have, and what we don't want is losing the economy without knowing what's going to replace it, and that's what we're trying to do. It's about sustaining what we have while we slowly but surely amend our product to ensure that Caymanians make more from it. So hopefully that answers your question.
Mr. Lindsay, thank you very much for your questions and for joining us today. We're going to move on to CMR, Cayman Mall Road now for our final questions, and then we're going to wrap up. Please go ahead. Do we have CMR on Zoom? Please go ahead with your questions. Okay, it appears that we're not getting them.
There we are, Donna. Sorry, my
Okay.
apologies.
Please go ahead with your question, Sandy.
Yes, it had me muted. My apologies. So my question is this: obviously, there's going to be quite a bit of advertising around the referendum questions, in particular the one in relation to the port. So on behalf of one of our listeners, they're wondering if there will be any rules in relation to that. Specifically, Jonathan Eady asked if there's going to be a cutoff period wherein the promotional/political campaigning regarding the referendum questions will actually be prohibited. So leading up to election day, is there any sort of a cutoff period? He's suggesting 90 days. But has there been any thought given to this? I don't know that there's necessarily any rules around how you promote a referendum.
Good question, actually, and I want to say to Mr. Adam, great thinking out of
Mr.
the
Eady.
Mr. Eady. Oh, Mr. Eady, thank you so
Yes.
much for the question, sir. Like you said, I don't know if there's any rules around referendum promotions, but I'm going to assume that it's very similar to that as the election. And in the elections law, at midnight before the election, all promotions have to be ceased and taken away. So I'm assuming it's going to be the same in that respect. I can't see, I think you said something like 90 days before. I think you want to continue to educate people about a matter as close as you possibly can to the decision, so it's fresh in their minds. So I think following the general elections for candidates would be suited in this respect. But I'll do some research on that just to confirm with the elections officials that that is the case.
Right. And what sort of engagement can we expect from the government on this topic? Because, of course, when it came to the last sort of engagement relating to the port, expansion of the port facility, it was less than desirable. So a lot of people are asking, going into the referendum, can we expect today to be the kickoff of your engagement period with, the respective parties making the rounds sort of to all media houses?
Yeah, we're definitely going to be. I said so in my delivery of my speech that we'll be doing social media posts, live videos, debates, and so forth. And the media team with their comprehensive education campaign will definitely direct me on making sure it gets on the various platforms, whether it be radio, social platforms, YouTube channels, or in the community. Either way, we're committed to making sure we inform the people as much as we can with the facts that we have.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Any final words from members of the panel?
Donna, I just want to say thank you for hosting us today. Thank you to the media and those who are listening via the public. We appreciate giving us this opportunity to have your listening ear and your time to see us on YouTube. I just want to say again, this referendum is a historical one, and it definitely has the opportunity to shape our future in one way or the other. And I ask that you get as many people registered that you know, kids that just turning 18. You know, it's your time to participate in the future of your country. We do this for you, so get involved. And I will continue to try to update the public on any new developments in respect to this space about the referendum. That being said, thank you so much for this opportunity. God bless you. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Minister Bryan, and to the other members of the panel. Again, you can have a look at this report by going online to www.gov.ky/tourism- or -ports. Again, that's where you can find that report. That brings us to the end of